Welcome to How to Write Show Notes. This is how to add value and engage your listeners and improve SEO with your episode description. Now, we will talk a little bit about SEO, but I think a lot of those will leave for questions at the end. So, yeah, we'll move along. Here's the plan. I'm going to talk at you for about maybe half an hour, 35 minutes-ish. If you've got any questions, then please do pop them in the chat and keep that chat lively and distracting and stuff. I will look at it once I've done it, unless, like if I see a lot of messages that look like things are on fire, then I'll take a look. Other than that, I'm going to sort of run on through this. And if you've got questions, leave them in the chat, and also feel free after I've spoken at you to invite you to unmute yourself and ask any questions. The robot should have warned you that this is recorded, and it's part of a new set of events that I'm hoping to run, or that I am running, every 2 weeks under the Podcode Sessions banner. So you'll find more of these events. There's another one scheduled at the moment in 2 weeks' time, which is all about cross promos, which would be lots of fun. So you'll find all of that stuff at podcode.co/events. So a little bit about me. Hi, I am Mark Steadman. With that, I'm going to, as I enter sort of presentational mode, knock my camera off and make the slides sort of front and center. So yes, I started Podcode last year. I don't know why I've said 2022, first mistake of the slide. Bing. I established it last year as a way to, as a sort of repository for all of the things that I've learned and understood in my, officially like 13 years in podcasting. As my work is evolving now, I'm aiming to work with people who want to affect change in the world. So be those social entrepreneurs, change makers, people who just want to make a difference and want to use podcasting as a way of creating impact with their voice. Prior to that, I ran a media hosting company called Podiant, which I started in 2016. And prior to that, I've been in digital and web stuff for, since the turn of the century. And on with the little arrow here is one of the first pieces of podcasting gear that I ever bought. It was a Zoom H2, and I loved it so much. It was such a novelty. It was just one giant microphone that you could plonk in the middle of a table. It didn't sound great, but man, it was cute. I loved it. So show notes then. Show notes it's something of an overcrowded term. It can mean so many different things. It feels like it can mean the working document that you have between maybe you and a co-host, you and your producer, as you're working actually on the show itself. That feels like here are the notes for the show. These are the show notes. It could be the episode summary. It could be the plain text description of the episode that appears in apps. It could be the full text, rich text description that appears in apps when you're playing the episode. It could be the post on your website. And it is, I'm going to try and disambiguate this stuff as much as I can. So that does mean I am going to talk a little bit about XML. I'm sorry, it's perhaps unavoidable, but XML is what powers the podcast feed that takes your audio into apps like Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And so your hosting company makes that feed up for you based on the data that you tell it. And as you sort of see at the bottom of this slide here, your host, it sort of filters what you want to say through its own system, and then each app individually makes its own judgment about what information it's going to display about each of your episodes. So we face a little bit of a challenge of consistency when we're trying to write our show notes. So let's sort of break some of this down. What we'll mostly be talking about today, I'll talk a little bit about the what we call the iTunes summary and a recent revelation on my part about that. We'll talk about the plain text description and the rich text description. They are delineated here by in our podcast feed. They're described by the description tag and the content encoded tag. It's not important why, but just to know that in your feed they are two separate entries, technically speaking. And then there's the rich text description that's on your website. And when I say rich text, I am referring to HTML. And I'm going to try and use as few acronyms and technical terms as possible. This is not an entirely technical talk. So, but some of it, I think, to give you context, I think it's worth us getting into some of the tech stuff. So let's look at the episode summary first off. So you can put a plain text version in your description. We, when I say me, those and others in the industry, particularly James Cridland of Pod News, who did this wonderful piece of research that is linked here, and you can scan the QR code to get it. He did this back in 2019, so it's due for an update because this stuff does change. But he helped us all understand which apps use which pieces of information. Now, I thought, I'll be honest with you, because I still struggle with some of this stuff, and I used to have to write these feeds, like these podcast feeds that I'm talking about. I wrote them like it was my business to deliver these, and this is still murky to me. But the iTunes summary is basically, it's kind of a one-sentence intro to your episode. Some people call it the subtitle. There used to be separate fields for the subtitle and the summary, and it gets really confusing. So let's first look at this summary. It is basically a one-sentence description of your episode. And it is I think it's really hard to convey anything of great value in one sentence, especially with the title as well. So some people tend not to use it, which means instead of that sort of pithy one-sentence description, it falls back and shows your overall description, your longer description for your episode. So as I've sort of mentioned here, your description in your feed should be in plain text. So that means no formatting, because your podcast app is not going to recognize it. Most podcast apps do support the rich text format, but it's our sort of, what we want to make sure is that hosting companies and everyone involved sort of tries to adhere to these two standards. So the reason I bring this up is if you ever see anything looking funky in your podcast app, you've published an episode and you're like, hang on, these show notes don't look anything like what I've formatted. You know, I've put line breaks in and bulleted lists and headings, and it's all just come out mushy. That does happen from time to time. And so this at least hopefully gives you some context and some things maybe to ask your hosting company, who can then give you a little bit of context, because they're actually the best people to ask to start off with. So as I say here, most apps, if you don't have that iTunes summary, they're going to just show the first sort of sentence, and it's really truncated. If you're listing episodes, if you're searching for episodes, or if you're just checking out a podcast in Apple Podcasts or Spotify, you're only going to see a very short description. So it's really important to get that right. And we are going to talk about my sort of, for want of a better word, template or formula outline for writing an effective description for your episode. So we start with making a good introduction. We want to remove boilerplate stuff from the beginning of your episode description. So for example, we don't need to begin an episode description with, on this episode of the Shoes and Bags show with Susan Bags, we talk about shoes and we also talk about bags with our special guest, Jeff, right? All of that is wasted sort of text, especially if I'm only seeing a short amount of text when I'm browsing through episodes. So what you want to do is get me hooked right in with that first sentence, and I'll talk in more detail about that. You can add context later. You can talk about how amazing your guest is later. But if I don't know who that guest is yet, I want to be hooked in by the subject, and I want to be enticed and invited to listen and to gain that extra context. So steer clear of, as I said, of adding formatting. Just try and just write, especially in those opening paragraphs, in plain text without relying on formatting or bolding or links or anything like that, because they're likely to not get displayed the way you want them everywhere. So that's the sort of plain text description. Your hosting company should also allow you to add a full text description. It's probably in the same box. That's the thing. You probably have a box when you're uploading an episode that says like title and the date, and you drag the MP3 file in, and there's a big box for your show notes. Some people will call it the description. Some people will call it the body. There's a few different names, but this is what is often referred to as your show notes. So this is your full text description of the episode. And this is where you can really go wild, right? All the formatting. No, sadly not. We are still limited in the kind of text that we can put in. So as you can see here, it's supported by all apps, asterisk. So what I'm referring to with this technical name, this content encoded name here, I'm referring to what you see in your app. So when you you're listening to an episode, when you've hit play and you're checking it out, what do I see as the description of this episode? And this is the most important thing for your listeners. And we are going to get deep into that, right? So my advice is it should be based on that plain text description, but then with that sort of added formatting you can add paragraphs, you can add bulleted lists, you can add links. Almost anything else you add, like bold and italic, images, certainly, block quotes, they're all going to get stripped out by most apps. Some apps behave differently, and that behavior can get a little bit hard to track. But if we're looking at the big top two, Apple Podcasts and Spotify, you really want to just stick to paragraphs. So either hitting enter or hitting enter twice when you're typing in your podcast hosting CMS. Bullet pointed lists are fine. As I say, links, and we are going to get deep into links. And then you've got 4,000 characters to play with. So you've got plenty of space before your app is going to truncate that information. So those 4,000 characters do include the HTML tags that go in as well. But you've got lots and lots and lots of space, but we don't want to use too much space. And I think we'll talk about why in a bit. Quick note, actually, I will say, I know I'm speeding through this quite quickly. There's a lot of detail here, and I know I tend to talk quite fast. I will have a link at the end for all the slides that I'm talking about as well. And the replay will be available to people who sign up in the community as well. So, which I'll tell you about a little bit later. So don't fret, I know I am barreling through a lot of this stuff and, throwing out some technical stuff. It will all, at least you'll have the slides to fall back on. So here are my tips for writing that in-app description. Use short sentences. Remember that people are going to be reading this stuff on their phone because they've hit play and then they're getting extra information reading this on their phone. So text can very quickly look like a big scary column of text if you don't break it up nicely. So a couple of sentences per paragraph tends to work really well. Think about the reading age. So there's a great app called Hemingway app or at hemingwayapp.com, which does a few things. It's almost the sort of great grandfather to Grammarly in some ways. It will help you gauge how difficult your text is to read. And so when you're on a mobile, if you think about people being browsing through episodes, maybe it's an episode of your show, they're already subscribed to your show and they're figuring out, is this do I want to check this one out? They're reading the description. Is this interesting? And they're in the queue at the supermarket. They're in the queue for the checkout. Do you want to add a load of hyperbole and a load of sort of waffle that might be enlightening? It might be fun. It might be, funny. And that those show notes might be a way for you to creatively express yourself. But if you're thinking about a busy person in the supermarket checkout, deciding whether or not they want to listen to your episode, simple is better. Get it better. Keep it nice and simple. Make it nice and spacious. So again, couple of sentences to a paragraph, nice and short sentences, and use hemingwayapp.com to keep that reading age down, reduce the number of complicated words, reduce the length of sentences. It really does make a difference, actually. I have to say, my blogging has come on a huge leap since using this because it helps with run-on sentences and all sorts of stuff. So highly recommend it. So that's the in-app description. So that's what appears on your phone when you check out the episode. We also have what most people tend to think of as show notes, and we'll do a bit of myth busting in a bit, but this is the episode web page. So this is the web page for your episode. It's what I call your episode's canonical home on the web. So when you're sharing your episode out on social media, this is the link you want to share to them. It's a page that exists on your website. It's land you own. It means that you can invite the listener to do all sorts of things. You can invite them to check out your newsletter or or subscribe to your podcast if they're not already, or anything else. Check out more information about the guest or the hosts. All of that stuff is available to them when you share a link that's on your website yourself that you own, rather than pointing them to Apple Podcasts or Spotify, because as soon as you've done that, you've sort of lost them. You can't guide them through what you want them to do. So that page should include an episode player. So it should have the embedded player for your episode. If you are running a website on a different platform than your media host, for example, you're hosting with Libsyn and you have a website on WordPress, Libsyn will provide you a player that you can drop into WordPress, and so you can put that player at the top of your page. And then you want to add the description. So again, it's adding those show notes that we've already discussed, same as the ones that are in the app, but now you can embellish them a lot more because now you're on the web. You are free to do whatever your content management system will allow. So if you want to add extra context like block quotes, like images, like numbered lists and more, even code snippets, all that kind of stuff, you do that because that is your website. And again, that's great because that's land you own. What's really important is that you link that episode web page in your feed. So what that means is when I check out your website, when I check out your podcast, when I start listening to it and I want to know more, I want to tap the title of the episode and be taken through to your website. I don't want to go through to your hosting company's share this episode page. I don't want to go through to my Overcast sharing page. I want to see your website with your information on it because I care about you and your stuff. And so if that sounds like news to you, that's a thing that happens, because it's news to lots of people. And if you don't know how to do that, then look for a field in your hosting provider's content management system that will be called something like episode URL or web page URL or permalink. If you don't see it, for example, if you're on Anchor, they don't allow this. Castos don't allow this. There's going to be a few others that don't. So petition them to add this field because, again, it means that your podcast is more closely tied to your website, which is always a good thing. Try and minimize the repetition of text on your website. It's okay if you want to add lots of sort of calls to action in your in-app description. But if you do that on the web, you're going to get penalized by Google because it's going to say, like, hang on, you've got a lot of this, like, subscribe to the podcast text that's appearing here. I seem to be seeing the same text everywhere and it'll devalue your pages. So try and keep that repetition down. Make sure you have plenty of buttons to subscribe to the podcast, in your sidebar or in your footer, and make them nice and obvious for people as well. Okay, so next up then, this is my sort of episode description template. This is my structure that I adhere to. I start off with setting up tension in the first sentence. I'll go through these in a little bit more detail. So set up some tension, explore how the episode is going to relieve or release that tension, give some background and context, and then link to the things that I discussed in the episode. So this is sort of the what. We'll begin with the what, if you like. We're going to set up some tension right from the beginning. So I'm not necessarily talking about clickbait, and I'm not talking about getting a rise out of your listener. I'm not talking about trying to provoke them or manipulate them. This is simply about posing a question, raising a problem, making a provocative statement. Maybe it's something that demands an answer, something that demands curiosity. That's what we want. We want to tweak our listeners' curiosity, and we can do that by setting up a bit of tension at the beginning with a short sentence that sort of puts us into your world and puts us into the world of this episode. And ideally, it would be great if it's something that the listener can identify with straight away. It's like a definitive statement that's like, yes, I feel like that. And then once we've set up that tension, then we can relieve it or release it when we talk about the sort of, if you like, the who. So who's coming to the rescue with this? Reassure us that the answer to this problem does exist and that the answer can be found in this episode. You don't have to say that explicitly, but that is the inference here. That, like, I've set up that tension in that opening paragraph, and now I'm saying, okay, now, like, you're in the right place if you want the answer to this, and to invite the listener to check out the episode so that they can get that answer. There is a school of thought that goes into really detailed sort of blog post format stuff on in your web show notes, like, again, the episode web page. There are some people who go really detailed into their blog posts. And I think if you've got the time for that, that's great. That's not a bad thing to do. For the in-app version, you still want to keep it nice and simple. Try and use this formula, I think, because it tends to work and it keeps your writing short. If you did want to do a much more expansive version in a sort of blog post format, for your website, then that's fine. But it is going to take a lot of extra time. So you may have to figure out where you can shave some time off there, or punt that off to someone else. So after that, after you've sort of given us those, we are only talking about a couple of sentences to begin with. That's your first paragraph. Your next paragraph gives us some background and some context, especially if you've got a guest. Now you can talk about the expertise that they bring. Why are they the person who is right to talk about this particular problem? Why are they the one that brings the solution to our problem or to our question? If you're not guest-based, but you're more narrative, we can look at why this particular story. I like to think about, like, why you, why me, why now? Why this? Why now is always an interesting one, because it adds a sense of urgency. But we sort of, now we want to drop into that context, that wider sort of, oh right, this is why this person is right to talk about this thing. A little bit like how I started. I didn't start straight off by introducing myself and talking about me and my career. I sort of, got us into the thing and explained what we were doing first, and then, find out a little bit more about me. And it's a little bit like the inverted pyramid in journalism to some degree. We are starting off with the most important information. In our case here, we're starting off with something a little bit more evocative. Again, not manipulative, not clickbaity, but just something that says, ooh, and sparks that curiosity. And then we go down at a little bit more context. And then the last element of this pyramid is those links. So link to the things you discuss. This is one of the biggest. It's one of the most common sort of things I see missed when people are putting their episode show notes together for the app version. I'm talking about what I see in the app when I'm listening to your episode, and I tap over to the episode description. I swipe over if I'm on Overcast, or I swipe down if I'm in Apple Podcasts, and I'm looking at your description. If you've talked about a thing, I want to know. I want to go to that thing. If you've talked about a hilarious YouTube video or a fascinating TED Talk or a book, whether you want me to buy it or you think it's interesting, link me to it. Point me in the direction. I'm a weapon. Point me. And the best way to do that is just list them in chronological order, so that I can follow along and go, yep, okay, they talked about that thing. Cool. Now I can follow this thing. Don't worry too much about taking your listener away. I think there's that sentiment in the web that we don't want to take listeners or readers away from our website. That's not really an issue with podcasting. We don't manage our attention in that way. So link to the things you discussed. Start with your guest. Start with the guest bio. Don't start with your own stuff. You can do that later. Start with the guest, then in chronological order, and then look at your calls to action. If you've got sponsors, put those in. Some tools now are making it easier to make these show notes sort of dynamic. Captivate is doing a really good job of really helping you template this stuff. And so you may be able to get this going really easily with Captivate. And Transistor, who I use, they allow me to add stuff in and out dynamically based on if I've got ads that I'm running and all sorts of stuff. I can change the show notes for each episode without having to constantly rewrite everything, which is great. So here's the biggie. How do you actually link to things? How do links work? Because this is something that I see, I don't like to say done wrong. It's because, I've been in the web for 20 years, and I know the power of the link and how they work, and not everybody does. And I think the same rules apply to writing for the web. The same rules apply for writing for podcasting. So that top one there, that first example, that's what we call a naked link. That's bad for a few reasons. I will get into them. The second is a more of a, it's in the right format in that we've got words that we can click or tap, and we click those words, and that's great. They shouldn't say click here. I'll get into that as well. The bottom is a good example because it's a link in context. It's a sentence, and then the sort of actionable thing, in this case, the book, I can tap that. It's underlined. I know it's a link. Quick point of order, actually, if you're ever writing for the web, never underline anything unless it's a link, because underlining, we are hardwired to understand. If you underline something, it means a link. So don't underline things that aren't links, because we're going to think it's a link. So don't use naked links. Naked links, as that thing at the beginning there, it's just a web address with sort of, in many cases, you can't actually do anything with it. It's just a web address out in the open, like you might put in Instagram. It's like you can't do anything, you can't select it, you can't tap it, you can't do anything. Different apps will support it in different ways, but it's really inaccessible because again, it provides no context. If you've got a screen reader, for example, and your phone is reading to you the contents of the description, it's just going to end up with https www.website.com/ and then a whole, a big load of, God forbid, it's a really long web address. It's going to be there for ages. Don't do it. It's not kind to your listeners, especially those that have differing accessibility needs. It's just not how the web works. It's not meant to work that way. It lacks context. So try and avoid just putting links out in naked form. There is a misapprehension that you have to do that because otherwise apps won't support. And I'm happy to, we can have that conversation when we do some questions, which we will do in a bit. So semantic links, like the two examples there, where you've got some text that you actually click and it takes you to that link. It should tell us what we're going to get. It should tell us what we're linking through, what we're clicking through to. Google uses this as a signal. So people who are linking to you are doing the same thing. They are telling Google what your website means to them. So you might see this all the time. So back in the day, in the early 2000s, if you typed "click here," the words "click here" into Google, you would be the first result would be Adobe Flash. And that's because all the websites back in the day used to say, this website requires Flash. If you need to download Flash, click here. And the words "click here" would be a link. Now, obviously, Google's got smarter now. But what's interesting is now if you type "click here" into Google, you get a slew of articles about why you shouldn't use "click here." There's also all sorts of other reasons as well why "click here" is not a good phrase. One of them being, again, screen readers, because what happens to them is the screen readers navigate by links. And so all they hear is "click here, beep, click here, beep, click here." If you've got 3 links going to 3 different places, or another one is this, and this. Often people link in that form. And then all that happens is your screen reader goes, this bleep, this bleep, this bleep. You don't know. So use the text inside the link to tell us what we're actually going to get. So here's an example. This is a bit of code. It's fairly simple. This is HTML code. So the names for things are confusing and terrible. href. What the hell does that mean? Href just means what is the URL to this thing that we're talking about? What is the actual, if I copy the thing in my address bar, what is that going to point to? And so that's the example.com bit. And then the bit in between the A's is the bit that is clickable. That's the description of what you're getting. So like I said in that previous example, here we go. This week's guest is the author of the book 4,000 Weeks. 4,000 Weeks is what we want to click because that's the name of the book. All right. So here's let's get into a couple of examples, and then we'll do a little bit of myth busting. So here's it. I'm not saying this is a concrete example, but this is a solid title. It's just a hair under the 80-character recommended maximum for a title. We could probably do a whole thing on titles. But there you go. Start building your audience by giving them things to watch, read, listen, and do. I just squeaked it under the 80-character limit. Between 60 and 80 tends to be the length, because apps will truncate the title to differing degrees. So trying to keep it nice and short. And yeah, obviously, if you want to incorporate the guest's name in there, if it's important, if that is a factor by which people might judge the episode, then absolutely include it there. And then here's the opening sentence that I've got for a forthcoming episode. Marketing can feel opaque and magical. It either works or it doesn't. And when it doesn't work, it can be hard to learn from, right? So we've set up a bit of tension. And then, but as Mark's first guest reveals, marketing is much more about doing the work and showing up consistently. And there's a little bit of I think there's like a fragment of a sentence afterwards that sort of says, but it should also be fun. So we're relieving that tension. And then we go into the background of my particular guest. So new paragraph, I'm now explaining, like, here's the guest, here's who I've got on, and this is the knowledge and the expertise that they bring. And then I've got a list of chronological links. So these are the things that we discussed in chronological order. He's the next voice that you hear. So connect with him on LinkedIn. We talked about his community, and then we've got some videos that we talked about. I mentioned that I was on TikTok, so my TikTok link is there, and that's the way we do it. It's just a nice list of canonical links, and then calls to action are on my website. There is a newsletter there. There are buttons to follow the podcast. I have another similar show where there's a button if you want to be a guest. And that's all on the website. So here's a little example of how something might look on the web. So this is a much more verbose version, but I just wanted to show you that in Apple Podcasts, there was a period where everything looked horrible and everybody was using naked links because they thought, well, Apple's like, no, they just screwed it up for like 2 weeks. These things happen. I think it's important that we try and write for slightly more the longer term rather than writing for sort of short term. And also don't write your content around bugs in applications. If there's a bug in the way show notes are displayed in, for example, Spotify, it's on them to sort it, and it's on us to tell them and on our listeners to let them know as well. It's not on us to start trying to fit our content, because we can't do that, because the landscape is constantly changing. So stick to some best practices like the ones I've laid out. And again, huge thanks to James Cridland on that for doing the work. So here's a couple of myths before I open up for some questions. Myth: the episode summary goes in your feed, and then the show notes go on your website. Like, that's what you do. The show notes are just, they're a web page. You don't have that on your phone. Like, you just have the description of the episode. I strongly and vehemently disagree. Your listeners want to take action. They want to know, like I said, the things you talked about. Don't put them extra taps away. Let them get at them really quickly. Say, links to the things we've discussed are on your screen now or in your podcast player. Or Dave Jackson does this really well. schoolofpodcasting.com/348, all of the links, all of the several links to things he discusses on each episode, and there are several, you can always find, and he always says it, they're out of the schoolofpodcasting.com/348. That's the episode number. So everybody knows then that's where they can get stuff, but they are also in app as well. They are also in the app. No one reads show notes. I think that's a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy, because if you make show notes that aren't hugely valuable, then people aren't going to read them. Also, we don't have a metric for knowing actually if people read show notes in app. We can't know that. We can only know if they've downloaded an episode. We don't know if they've read the show notes. And then here's a big one for me. Bitly and Linktree are good for reading out short URLs. Yeah, okay. So an example recently, and I tried to find the audio, but this podcast uses dynamic ad insertion, so I wasn't able to grab it because they'd swapped out the ad. But it was for a book written by, it's for a book. And the URL that they were trying to read was Linktree. It was a Linktree URL, and it was painful. The host had to say linktr.ee/Goldie's Guide, and Goldie's is spelled GOLDIES. He could have just said there's a link in the show notes. He didn't put a link in the show notes. They never do, this particular podcast. And this particular podcast in question, they have a lot of these things. They have a lot of things they want to promote. They want to talk about the tour that they're going on. They want to talk about the t-shirt or the pins, the brooches and all sorts of different things that they've got available. And for each one, they read out a different interminably long email, web address. And this could all be solved by having a list of links at the bottom of the episode description that says, get this badge. Here's the tour dates. Here's where you can sign up for this book, and then say links are on your screen now, or you can find them at myshow.com/episode number. So final sort of closing thoughts, and then we'll do, I will take a drink and we'll do some questions. So sort of wrapping things up then, create and resolve tension in your opening line. Link to things discussed, link to them in order, link to episode, put your episode link in your feed. Let your host do that if you don't know how to do that. If you have a website that is managed differently from your podcast, for example, like I said, if you're on Libsyn, and you host your website on WordPress or elsewhere, then ask Libsyn how to do that. There is a field like Libsyn, make this super easy. But if you're in doubt, if you don't know what that is, what to do, either have a chat with your hosting company or have a chat with me. Avoid headings and bolds and italics and images in your in-app show notes, because they're just, they will display to differing degrees. As you saw in that example, there was a heading that was supposed to be bold that didn't appear bold, but the link worked. Paragraphs, bullet lists, and as I say, links are good. And ask your host how they treat the text that you're putting into the system as well. Ask them, what filtering they might do, so that you can start to understand, because the hosting company makes a decision and then each app makes a decision. So ask them first, like, are you doing any processing? How do you put this information in your podcast feed? So there you go. I'm gonna take a drink and I'll have a quick perusal of the of questions and the chit chat. So I'll take my mic off for just a tick, have a read of this. And while we're doing that, I'll give you the opportunity to take out your phone and snap this QR code if you want to get the slides emailed directly to you. Oh, some lovely questions here, so thank you. Much appreciated. Let's have a little look here, and I'll jump on camera in a sec. But okay. How do you feel about using episode numbers in titles? Is this important? My advice is not to put any metadata in your title that is not the title of the episode. You can do things like, if you're in Libsyn, for example, they and some other hosts offer the ability to have a separate title for Apple Podcasts. The reason for that is that Apple introduced episode numbering as a separate little display. So this works great for season, podcasts that are part of a season. So it would say, in smaller text, like season 3, episode 1. You don't need to put that in your title. And I would advise you strongly against doing so anyway, because again, if you think about the truncation aspect, if you've got, some people even put the name of the podcast in. So if you've got name of the podcast, season, episode number, and then the title, it's possible that most of that title is being lost. Maybe do a quick sort of 3-digit number at the beginning if you want to, but only if your hosting company gives you a separate Apple Podcasts title field, because otherwise Apple don't like it. They have expressly said, please don't put episode numbers or any other metadata in your titles, because we don't want them, because we want you to specify the episode number in the bit where it goes. So I hope that's clear. And if it isn't, then do shout up. Do all hosting platforms allow you to code HTML into the show notes on your feed? Sort of yes, mostly no. They provide you a rich text box where you have, like what you see is what you get, WYSIWYG editor, where you've got bold, italic, and underline, and all that kind of stuff. Some of them will allow you to put arbitrary HTML in. Like some of them might have a box. I think Libsyn actually might do, or they used to, where you could put in code. Don't do it, because it's going to get stripped out. Almost any code that you would put in manually is going to get stripped out and going to be ignored. So I wouldn't do it. If you use something like, what is the name? Fireside. Fireside uses Markdown, which is a syntax for writing rich text. You can Google that. It's a nice way of being able to write text that's sort of safe. And almost anything that can be supported in Markdown will translate and look quite nice in your show notes. Could you talk for a minute about writing? Yeah, show notes for fiction. I mean, that's an interesting one, I think. I have less experience with fiction, I'll be honest. But I think some of the same kind of rules apply. It's obviously less about like, this guest gives us this takeaway, But I think the idea of trying to set up some tension, maybe you don't get to resolve it in the same way in your description. But maybe you get to explain in the episode what you're going to explore. What is the problem of this episode? What is the arc? What is the sort of the hero's journey? What is it that someone wants? I guess. What is it that a main character wants? And what are the journey that they're going on? Then there's also obviously plenty of argument around and good healthy discussion around like crediting all the people involved. I don't know. People will have different opinions about whether you put that in the in-app show notes or put that on your website. Definitely put it somewhere. I think on your website is probably a good place. So, credit the people who are involved in making the thing, writing the thing, all that kind of stuff. Definitely put that on your website, if nowhere else. Should you always cue your listeners to check out the show notes by saying there's a link in the show notes, or is it not always necessary? And how many links, how much material in the show notes is too much? I think to a degree. So if I do the first one, the last one first of like how much is too much, I think if it gets boring or feels overwhelming, then it's too much. I think links, if you're talking about 20 different things, you've got 20 links. I think that's fine, because again, you don't know which bit might catch someone's eye. Oh, they might really need to know about, or maybe you've talked about a video that they've forgotten about for 20 years and they think is lost to the internet, and you have dug it up and you've linked to it, and it might be among 20 other links, but you could have saved their bacon. Like, you might make their day by linking to that thing and then giving them the ability to jump off. So there is that. I think, yeah, like I would say sort of, there's a link in the show notes. Check the show description. I like saying things like the links are on your screen or on the device that you're listening to right now, but also sort of for those people who don't know that that's possible. For example, if you're on Overcast, the show notes aren't super, like you have to know that you can swipe to the right to get them. Whereas Apple Podcasts, I think it's possibly a little bit more obvious that you swipe down. I wouldn't get too bogged into it because everybody's experience is different. But if you're in any doubt, just point them to your website. And it's always nice if you can have a website where you can say like mywebsite.com/3, and that points you to episode 3. That might not be the full URL of your episode, but it gets them there. If you use something like I've forgotten the name of it, but it's one of the services that makes websites out of podcast feeds. It's a wonderful service. They do that. So I have a client that I work with. She has a website on this, and she can point people to like dressfancy.uk/80. And what that will end up with is a much longer URL, but it means that if someone types that into their phone or whatever, if Lucy said, and you can get links at dressfancy.uk/80, they can just type that and it's really easy, and then we'll get through to that episode. So investigate that if that's not something that you already have. Do you recommend a platform for SEO? For titles, for episode titles, I think I would. There are a few of these like title analyzers. Take them with the pinch of salt, but like understand their biases and what they want. They're not necessarily geared towards podcast episode titles. The other thing I would say is there is a very big difference between SEOing the episode title in app and the title on the web, because on the web it's basically a web page, so you can do all the sort of SEO stuff that you want to do as long as it's legit and not too spammy. You probably want to do less of that on in the in-app version. Like when someone's searching for an episode, you definitely want to capture the information that's going to be pertinent, but remember that when episodes are being searched, very little information actually gets searched. It's only really the episode title and the author. There's more information about it. I worked with James Cridland last year at Pod News, and we did a big deep dive on this. So I can link you to that as well. We did a big thing about like what apps search on, what information in our feed do they actually search on, and it's not that much. So yeah, episode titling, it's a bit tricky. Plugins like Yoast are really good for helping if you've got a WordPress website with SEO. But there are if you just Google like headline analyzer, you will find a few tools. I don't have any that I would like endorse personally. We put transcripts on our website, but is there a way to integrate them into show notes apart from just linking out? Is there a benefit to putting that text in the show notes? I would say there is not a benefit to putting that link in the show notes, that text in the show notes. I think it makes them too bulky, and you will almost certainly definitely hit upon the 4,000 character limit, so they'll get truncated anyway. So do link out to them. Depending on the host you use, they may put links in the they may put the transcript, pop my camera back on. They may put the transcript in the feed for you. So there is a growing number of apps that support this. So there are some apps. If you go to newpodcastapps.com, you will find a bunch of apps that support this. There is a new sort of standard for putting transcript data into your episodes. Go and have a look at that, because it will tell you not only the apps that support it, but also what hosts support it. My one, as I say, the host that I use is Transistor, and they have that. So I can copy and paste a transcript, and it will be linked in my feed for people. I also link it on my website. So all of my podcasts that I do now at Podcode, there is a transcript for each episode that is linked from the main show notes, and it's just a big text document, but sort of nicely, easily readable. I think, yeah, that does it. What I'm going to do is I will invite anyone who wants to unmute. I never know how to use. Turns out I don't actually know how to use WhatsApp. I'm trying to mute everyone. But if you do want to unmute, then drop a message in the chat. Turns out I don't know how to use Zoom. See if there's anything else that you want to ask, that you want to cover. I'm happy to do so. Next, while that's happening, next time in 2 weeks' time, we are doing we're talking about cross promos and how you can leverage cross promos to make awesome things happen for your podcast. So that will be in 2 weeks' time. So I hope you'll come and join me for that. Other than that, if you do want to ask a question, raise your hand or drop a message in the chat. Otherwise, I will thank you very much for coming. And this was a lot of fun, and I hope that there's some value there. Do snap that QR code if you want to get slides emailed to you. If you want to watch the replay, then that is available to members of the Podcode Plus community. So Podcode is my website for social entrepreneurs and change makers who want to use their voice to create impact. And it's all about helping them understand and be awesome at podcasting and to love it too. And Podcode Plus is our little extra community where we put on events like this. So if you did want to watch the video again, then you'll be able to do it there very soon. Thank you, everyone. That was a great deal of fun, and I will speak to you next week. Well, in 2 weeks' time. I hope to see you there. All right. Enjoy the rest of your Wednesday. It's been a great pleasure, and see you soon. Take care.